Hey everyone, this is Shawn Sandridge. Thank you so much for clicking onto my channel. So we are going to go on to part 2, which is about diabetes. So yesterday I talked about diabetes, about the medical aspects, the conditions, and some of the complications and how it affects the body. So today I'm going to talk about how it affects the person, how it affects the people in your lives, and I am going to talk to you in the perspective of a child. So just to give you a little background, if you are new to the channel, I am adopted, so I do not share the same DNA as my mother. My mother is my adopted mom. I was put into foster care at 9 months old, and I was placed in the same family, and then the way the foster care system was back then, I didn't get legally adopted until I was 12, but I was placed in the same home, and I was a foster child in the New York State foster care system from 9 months until I was 12. So when I talk about my mother is not my biological mother. And so when we talk about the traits and some of the factors about diabetes, she did have quite a few. So there was a family history of diabetes. My uncle, I had 2 uncles that had diabetes, and then of course she was overweight. I've never known my mother being thin. She was what I guess BMI would consider overweight, or borderline obese, and she was never active. She was an emotional eater, so I think that also perpetuated her weight, and she was also a night eater. She was a nurse by trade, and so she worked a lot of shift work, and mainly nights, so I think that also contributed to her weight issue. So I know that she had high blood pressure, and she was relatively young. She was in her early 30s. I found out about diabetes when my mother didn't come home. Now, my house was the house where my grandmother was always there, and I didn't have a key. And I grew up in the age where the coined phrase of latchkey kid. So I was one of the few kids that came home to someone. I didn't have my key around my neck. And one day I was 12 years old and I couldn't get into my house, and found out that day that my mother had slipped into a diabetic coma, and that was the first introduction of diabetes. So she obviously was pre-diabetic for quite some time, and so much had happened to her body that she had gone into a diabetic coma, and she actually was in a coma for 5 days. So that for me was a very defining moment of my childhood. That was a very defining moment about a lot of things, and obviously I did not know how to process it, but I do know that it affected me in many ways in my life, especially being a preteen, about how I viewed food, how I viewed weight, how I viewed health, some good and some not so good. So that was very traumatizing, I can honestly say. Looking back, it was a very traumatizing time in my life. Well, she survived through that. However, she never made those behavioral changes, those lifestyle changes to improve her health. So she was never active, and she did not change her diet. And my mother had a very huge fix for candy. She was a huge candy person. So I'm from New York, and it's not uncommon in New York that you have corner stores in your neighborhood. And back then, you could have $1 and go in and get 5-cent candy, 10-cent candy, and all that stuff. And it was not uncommon that my mom would send me to the store and pick up candy for her. And she loved spice gumdrops and, they didn't have them then, but she probably would have liked Sour Patch Kids and all those kind. She loved Mike and Ike's and all that kind of candy. And my mom would have bags and bags of candy. So I do remember that. It's kind of a love-hate thing. I remember it with some fondness of my childhood, but I also realized that it did take a toll on her health. Fast forward, I leave home and join the military and learn more about health and nutrition. And nobody had the conversation with me when my mother got sick. No one had the conversation about diabetes. I had to find those things out for myself. And because I was an inquisitive child and I had World Book Encyclopedia, that's really how I found out about diabetes and how it affects the body. And I really couldn't put it all in context, but I did know that food was an issue. So I was the type of child, and I didn't want to lose my mom. I would take her candy. It was almost like having an addict in the house and you find the contraband, and I would take her candy and throw it in the garbage. I would do things and throw it away because in my mind that was the source of all the problems. So that wasn't good because my mom wasn't into throwing food away and money that she paid for, things that she paid for that didn't do well. But I didn't know how to combat it. So I remember doing that a lot as a kid, hiding her stuff, throwing it away. And my mother was an excellent baker. So she would make cakes, and she would make these 3-layered chocolate cakes, with the cooking chocolate and coconut cake and things like that. And she'd make one for church and she'd make one for the house. And there was always sweets in the house. Now, I was lucky. I grew up in New York, but we always had a garden. So I had fresh food to eat, and we had apple trees in our yard. But again, behavioral changes was something that she never grasped. She ended up having a pacemaker. She ended up having issues with her eyes. When she ended up also having cancer, but the cancer ended up being treatable. But the complications of diabetes was so much so, she ended up having gangrene in her leg, and one of her things was that she never wanted to be amputated. But what ended up happening was that the gangrene had happened, and they have this term that things aren't compatible with life. Essentially your limb is dead, and the only way to save your life is to get rid of the limb. If you don't amputate, then what ends up happening is that the infection from the gangrene starts to seep into your bloodstream, and then you end up dying from sepsis, which is toxicity in your bloodstream. So she was by that time very weak, but myself and my other 2 siblings made the decision that for her quality of life, it was best to amputate. She did not have a directive. We had to make those decisions for her, which, as an adult, I can say that is very hard to do on your children. She stopped eating, she stopped talking, and so we had to take on those medical directives for her. She survived that surgery, and then her kidneys failed, and then she had to go on dialysis. And then she ended up having gangrene in the other leg. Also compound with that, she had created bed sores because she wasn't mobile. She had briefly went into rehab, but I think she really didn't have the will to live in the fact that she was in a lot of pain. And so, your skin breaks down when you're not moving. And as a diabetic, your skin breaking down and having bed sores just creates other forms of complications. The thing that I can say is that my mother left way too soon. She passed away at just turning 72. But her quality of life was impacted long before that time. And I don't know how scientifically sound it is, but I have heard that internally your body ages about 7 times older than it is. And I do believe that, because there was a point in time where I could tell. I mean, there all comes a time as an adult child that you realize your parents are getting older. But I experienced that a lot sooner. And it's really a very, it's just sad. And I tried to get her to change her diet, and she wasn't interested in it. And I think there was a point where she just, I don't know, it's one of those things. My mom was, she was a very religious woman, and she didn't drink, she didn't smoke. And I think eating was the only vice that she allowed herself to have that was socially acceptable. And she used food to deal with her emotions of being lonely, not having a partner. Her children were grown and on their own, and she had lost her mother many years ago, and so she was a caregiver. And when her mother died, she felt like she lost her best friend. So I think in many ways food was very much an emotional thing, and she wasn't willing to give that up. Now, I didn't understand that before. I had to step out of being angry as a child, as an adult child, and really understand the woman and the person who I was dealing with. So it was just not a good way. She left us really soon, and she couldn't do the things. She could not see very well. She loved to drive, and giving up that independence for her was very crushing. And also having to rely on other people was very emotionally draining for her. So as a family member, it's important to know that you have to approach your family member with a lot of grace and a lot of patience, and know that all you can do is be there to support when they're ready, if they ever get ready. And if you are someone who is hearing this that are going through physical conditions that, such as diabetes or high blood pressure, that are diet, lifestyle related, understand that you have a lot of control in this, and don't feel like you don't have control. And I think also in that generation that there is a certain, and I don't know, I'm guessing, but I think that there's a certain there's a culture of acceptance that this is part of the aging process that people have bought in. Not so now, because we're better educated, but I think there was in my mother's age group, like, this was way of life. This just happens, and it doesn't just happen. People are living really well and thriving. So understand your health is in control. Your health is your wealth. It is your most valuable asset, and don't take it lightly. So I hope you gain some understanding, and hopefully this is a way to start a dialogue with your loved ones. So yeah, so that's my story. If you want to talk more, put it down in the comments, and I hope you enjoy your weekend wherever you are. Take care of yourself and each other, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.